Cool. So, okay, so just understand, like, what's the benefit of having your own podcast versus being a guest on someone else's?
Well, first off, we call it OPP. I don't know. There's a song a long time ago called OPP, right? We call it other people's podcast. That's actually one of our strategies. So we've got 9 podcast growth strategies, and one of them is being a guest on other people's shows. What is, and you found this out already, my friend. If you're on somebody's show, the probability of them wanting you on your show is really high because the podcast community is tight, man. And so we love when our clients are on other people's shows. And what that does, Gavin, it gives you access to that show's audience, right? That's super powerful. But I, as a podcaster, as a person who, is a co-founder of a podcasting company, if you try to get on my show and you don't have a podcast, because I need to know your commodity, I need to know your known commodity, right? I need to be able to listen to some of your shows. What are your issues? What could I maybe even help you with to be better behind the microphone? And I also don't like it when people just piggyback on other people's success. I want you to start having your own organic growth and your own organic marketing. Um, but one of the most powerful things about having your own podcast is the ability to control your message. Um, so let's take accountants as a good example, right? So accountants here in the States are probably looked at as very boring people. But what they do for you is so important. In fact, they're one of the top 3 people that people trust. Priests, right? Accountants, and I think attorneys is the other one, right? Maybe, family and friends are in there too, but from a professional standpoint, physician. Um, and it's really important for them to be able to communicate what makes them unique and different because no 2 accountants are alike. They view the tax laws differently. They view what they'll do for you differently.
And then what are some tactics that you can use to kind of grow your audience? So, say I have my own podcast. I'm coming to you guys, maybe I'm doing it myself. What are
Mhm.
some ways you can grow your audience? Obviously, one way is having guests on the show where they can promote it for you. But what if you just kind of doing monologue type of podcast where you're just talking into a mic, sharing your thoughts on a particular topic? How do you grow that audience?
Well, surprisingly enough, Gavin, solo casts are much more difficult to promote. Uh, One of the powerful aspects of podcasting is the audience feels like they're eavesdropping in on a conversation they're interested in. People want to feel like they're in part of a conversation. You're being talked with instead of talked at. Um, Unless it's for me personally, unless it is something strictly educational, like something like hardcore history or one of those amazing podcasts, um there's got to be multiple voices or you just lose my attention. So that I believe that's a fundamental thing that we believe in. It has to be a conversation. But one of the other tactics that we use, if you're a business owner, now we focus on business owners, which is a highly underserved podcasting place. Business owners don't seem to realize the power of this. And so one of the things they need to do is they need to go into their existing book of business, right? All of your existing relationships should subscribe to your podcast. It's a great way for them to build a stronger connection with you. So there's number one. It also makes you more referable. It's easier for me as a or as a client to refer a friend of mine to a podcast than it is, hey, why don't you give my guy Gavin a call? And people don't do that anymore, right? I mean, that's a huge ask. It's like asking somebody to go on a date when you haven't even, looked at their Tinder profile, right? And so, that's really, really powerful. Last but not least, um, focused topics. So mini series are very powerful. So, for instance, if you're a physician and you're doing something on aging gracefully, right, which is something that's I think a lot of us really would like to do, right? I sure like to do that. And so they'll do a 3-part mini series on, let's say exercise, diet, and then elective procedures, right? Then they take that and they send that as their marketing kit out to everybody, their existing clients, their centers of influence, their referral partners. That's how you start getting a lot more traction. But please don't think that you already brought up the fact of being a guest or having guests on your show. That still is our best marketing technique. So you're a business owner, you have a referral partner or somebody you refer business to, or they refer business to you. And here's the thing, brother, you get them on your show, that's a 30-minute commercial about how awesome your referral partner is, and they're going to share that with their whole network. and you've deepened the relationship with that center of influence. I believe that that's still the most powerful technique to grow your audience.
Yeah, so I'm keen to understand just the power of influence, like how you can accelerate your influence through a podcast. I know from my experience, with Sendable, I launched a podcast for Sendable about 2 years ago, and then I went to this conference in the US, and all our customers came to the conference, and because they were listeners to the podcast, they kind of knew my story, so they came to me like in awe, like, Gavin, we know your story, like this celebrity to us. So there's definitely a power that you can generate through just being in people's ears, like they can hear your voice, hear your authenticity. But I'm curious from your perspective, like how do you think you can accelerate influence through a podcast?
Yeah, you just said something that's one of the most powerful techniques, which is vulnerability. You need to be yourself. People don't. It's that bravado thing I talked about right at the top of the show. Nobody wants that anymore. People want to know who Gavin is. People want to know who I am. It's funny. I'll do the same thing. We go to conferences, and people will come up to me and say, Matt, I feel like I know you already. Good, right? I mean, that's exactly what the whole point of this is. Um, so I think vulnerability is very, very, very powerful. One of the other things that a lot of people don't use well is hashtags. This might seem off subject, but it's very powerful, I believe, in podcasting, because you should use 5 hashtags. All right. So at people who use 50, I don't think that's right. I think you should use 5. Number one is a hashtag branded for your podcast, right? So, right. So for me, it's hashtag be your own loud, hashtag top advisor marketing. The other one should be the category of the medium. So that's podcasting, blog, video, YouTube, live stream, whatever. The next one should be the topic. So overarching, medical, medical advice, financial services. And then the fourth one should be a second layer of the description of that. So financial services, insurance, 401ks, Roths, pensions, blah, blah, blah. And then the last one, this is where a lot of people mess up. The last one should be geolocated. People say to me all the time, Gavin, I have people in, Australia listening to my podcast. And first I'm like, well, that's pretty freaking cool if you ask me, but they're not going to get clients in Australia. So if you use a geolocated hashtag, that helps the search engines make sure that they're placing your podcast in front of them, preferred over somebody who has a national show.
So you put the hashtag on the actual show
Yeah.
itself, or is it on each episode?
Each episode in the show notes specifically.
And then how do you generally measure influence? Like, on a podcast, if I'm on a podcast or have my own podcast, how can I measure return on investments?
So that's where everything crashes and burns, brother. That's what kills me. And one of the reasons is because of the way that podcasts are distributed. So you use Zencaster, we use something called Blueberry. Once it leaves these syndication sites, it goes out into the world, and the world doesn't talk back to these sites very well. So it's very, very difficult to find out really what your true reach is. Now, there are a couple of companies that are working on that, which we're really excited about. But it isn't a numbers game, because that's what you shouldn't be focusing on. This is what kills most people when they look at spending, $1,000 to $5,000 a month on running their own show with all of the social media and all of that sort of stuff, right? When they outsource their marketing to a company like ours. And Matt, I only had 30 people listen to my show. Okay, well, do you know if any of those were prospects? No, I don't. Okay, so I don't either, right? I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. But if you get one client, so if you're a physician, if you're an accountant, if you're an insurance professional, if you're a financial advisor, which are the areas that we focus on, that again, highly regulated professions, you get one client from your podcast, pays for the whole thing, right? And so we try to have them reconfigure their perspective a little bit, Gavin, and say, okay, so if you get one client in the life of that client, what is that client's life worth? They'll say 30, 50, $100,000. Okay, we just need to get you one client. An interesting statistic came out that if you get more than 500 downloads or listens to your podcast, you're in the top 20%. Isn't that crazy, dude? So, people just overshoot it, right? People just overshoot it. And on top of that, since we don't get a lot of reciprocal data from these companies, iTunes is terrible, right? iTunes does not share anything with anybody. Apple doesn't generally do that for security reasons and whatever their business philosophy reasons are. But like if you syndicate to Google Play, which you do, because I know it does it through Zencaster, I don't know if you know this, but it also goes to all of these education platforms that most people don't even know it does that. And so it gets to these educational platforms, but it's secondary or tertiary sharing, and you don't have any idea. So you could have 10,000 people listen to a show and it might only show up that you've got 500. But the big thing is this: are the right people listening, Kevin? That's the only thing that you really should be focusing on. Is your message clear? Is your target audience clear? And if you are talking to those people, you don't need that many.
I think just from my experience with the podcast I had for Sendable, it actually helped us with hiring. So we had people that were applying for jobs, and they listened to the podcast. They heard our story, like the behind the scenes story of the company, and they were so excited about the company that they obviously they applied for the job. Especially now in this market where it's hard to find tech people, I think having a podcast can really help your business stand out to attract talent. So for me, there's obviously the customer use case, but also the hiring use case. So I think both of those are really valuable, just from my personal experience. Actually, I have a listener question. Someone asked me to ask this to you. She's thinking of starting a podcast herself. She's been on a Clubhouse. She's been using Clubhouse for a while, but now thinking about like launching her own podcast. How would you advise someone like to get? How should someone get started? Like, do they need fancy audio equipment? Do they need like how do you start a podcast?
So I get asked this question on a daily basis, and I have a very structured, and it's going to sound somewhat rote because I say this a lot. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to get a piece of paper and you need to write down the top 12 things that you want to talk about. Okay, so I just want everybody to think about that for a minute. The top 12 things. So whatever your podcast is going to be about, and for us, it's for business owners, not for just entertainment. You write down the top 12 questions you hear from your clients or the top 12 things that you, for some reason, are always talking about. And then what you do is you take those overarching 12 topics, and underneath that topic, you break it into 2 subtopics. What you've just done is you just created a year's worth of podcast topics to put podcasts a month. Because Gavin, the biggest objection that I get is I don't know what I'm going to talk about. We take care of that in our discovery call, right? So that's the first thing. Don't hit record until you know, because there's this funny thing called pod fade. And pod fade is that most people get to about 4 to 6 podcasts and then they just poop out because they don't know what else to talk about. They're not getting the results that they expected, which is ridiculous. But most of the time is they don't know what to talk about. So there's the first thing that you have to do. Your confidence level then goes up, Gavin, because I know, okay, I got a podcast on this and I got a podcast on this and I can mentally prepare myself. So that's one. Number 2, it's game time and show time. You should have a pre-game before you get behind the microphone. This is a performance. Be ready for the performance. Warm yourself up vocally. Do stretches in your mouth. Like right before this, I have a couple of songs that I sing on my guitar. I have another vocal warm up. I'm standing up. I have all of these things. Now I am a podcaster, is what I do for a living, but I think that's super, super vital. Then the easiest part of all of it is the tech, dude. If you have a pair of the old Apple earbuds, now you can use the new super fancy ones without the wires, but the old Apple earbuds have a little microphone in it. And Gavin, I swear there's a fairy or some magical creature that lives in there because there's no reason why that should be so good. You plug that into your phone, you use riverside.fm, Zencaster, bunch of free apps, and you're ready to podcast. But people overthink it. I'm in a bunch of podcasting groups on social, and they're like, okay, I've got a $1,500 budget to start my podcast. What equipment should I buy? And I'm like, well, first off, you better not spend $1,500 on the equipment, because I would rather have you spend $1,500 on a professional person to write your summary, do your graphic design, that sort of stuff, right? That's to me more important. But so my setup here, Gavin, I don't even have $1,500. And this is what I do for a living. I've got a Rodecaster Pro, which I just upgraded to. I had a little itty bitty Yamaha AGO 3 mixer, which, by the way, is a magnificent piece of equipment. I just upgraded to this. My microphone is not even $100 mic. It's a Shure SM58 microphone. I did upgrade my boom arm just because my other one kept flinging out of the way. This was $100. So I've got a $500 mixer, which nobody needs but me. None of you need it, right? Here's the reason why. It's got these canned, anyway, I think that's funny. The microphone, I have a better microphone just because I know that it works with my voice. But yeah, you can get out of it for 200 to $600 if you really want to pump it up, or $19.99 for a pair of the old Apple earbuds. You're ready to go.
That's awesome. So I'm curious, like if you're interviewing a guest, what sort of like points do you have on on your notes while you're going through the interview?
I am very different from an organizational standpoint than most people, Gavin. I have one question. And that one question, which I asked you when you were on my show, tell me your history. Right. And then my background is as a therapist. So I listen to what you say in the history question. And that allows me to ask follow-up questions. Now, the other thing that I do, much like you did, was I ask my guests to send me questions they want me to ask, because it's a show, man. I really want everybody to realize there's an entertainment value to this. And so I want you to have the best performance you can have, brother. Right? That's super important to me. So if I know that you're going to ask me questions, or I'm going to ask you questions you know the answer to, your performance is going to be better. In fact, we have a thing that's called the perfect podcast formula. It's storytelling, education, entertainment, and call to action. Every one of your podcasts should have those four things. If they don't, you're missing some powerful real estate and some powerful influence techniques.